Each year, more than 46 million Americans will seek emergency room treatment for an accidental injury, most of which are preventable. So, what are your risks, and who can you trust to protect you? This is Safety Matters with Russ Kenzior.
This is Russ Kenzior, and welcome to Safety Matters. I'm joined by my producer, Tony. So, Tony, how was your vacation last week?
Oh, it was absolutely wonderful. I enjoyed the trip. You know, I enjoyed getting on American Airlines and heading to Florida.
So you actually did fly?
Yes.
Did you have your mask on?
Yes, I did.
They make you wear a mask.
They make you wear it.
Okay.
They didn't do the toggle deal. You know, they just handed you those little wipes. It's like a little
like
1 inch by 1 inch. You pull it out. It's like if I was very small with small hands, I'd be able to.
Yeah, I know. I got the same thing, but full flight?
Full flight. Actually, they wrote to, or they sent us an email saying, "Hey, would you like to give up your seat?" And they were only offering like $100 to change your flight. But we're flying with the whole family, so.
Well, needless to say, it's the world of the coronavirus. So.
Yes, it is.
Which takes us to our first segment.
Safety Matters in the News.
And what's in the news this morning?
Well, it's always the same, isn't it? We always start with coronavirus. We do have some good coronavirus news, though.
Let's hear it.
Well, just this past week, the number of hospitalizations for COVID-19 are now below 4,000 for the first time since June.
Amen.
So things are getting progressively better. In fact, new cases reported on September 4th shows that the positivity rate, that's the guideline our governor likes to use, has dropped below 10%. It's now at 9.7%. So we have fewer Texans being hospitalized, fewer deaths, and the positivity rates below the threshold, which raises the question whether or not, or what will happen with our governor to open the state up.
Open.
A lot of people want it open. It's already September. We open the schools. Time to open the bars and open. Time to move on. And I think we've kind of sort of turned the corner. But again, since June, things have really gotten progressively better. CDC put some new guidelines out. And it's funny, unless you're really going into the CDC website, you don't even get this stuff because they change it a lot and they don't tell you. But this past week, the CDC updated their testing guidelines, and they're now saying that not everyone needs to get a COVID-19 test. In fact, they say you only need to test if you have symptoms or have had close contact with an infected individual. They have finally defined, they never defined close contact. They finally defined close contact to be within 6 feet for 15 minutes. So if you do not have COVID-19 symptoms, and you have not had close contact with someone known to have COVID-19 infection, you do not need to be tested. Now, that's a totally different approach.
But it sounds logical.
It is finally getting to a point where we're making sense. Before it was everybody getting tested for everything all the time, and it just created this chaos. They also updated their recommendations where it says you do not necessarily need a test unless you are a vulnerable individual or your healthcare provider or state and local public health officials recommend you take one.
Again, that sounds logical.
Right. It's finally getting to a place where we're treating this like a bad flu.
Right.
And you got to be careful when you say that, because some people get really angry that, it's not a bad flu, you're a denier. I'm not a denier. And I'm just saying treat it like what it is. It is not the plague. Interesting story. In Austin, I don't know if you heard this, an Austin doctor got a COVID-19 test from his own company, and they billed his insurance for $11,000. Yeah, this is from the Texas Tribune. It says, when Dr. Zachary Sussman went to Physicians Premier ER in Austin for a COVID-19 antibody test, he assumed he would get a freebie because he was a doctor for the chain. Instead, the freestanding emergency room charged his insurance company an astonishing $10,984 for the visit. And you ready for this, Tony?
What?
Got paid every penny with no pushback. Yeah. So the bill left him so dismayed he quit his job, and he's out there saying, "Well, what's going on?" It says the case is the latest to show how providers have sometimes charged exorbitant prices for visits for a simple and inexpensive COVID-19 test. ProPublica recently reported how a $175 COVID-19 test resulted in charges of $2,479 at another and different freestanding ER in Texas. In that situation, the health plan said the payment for the visit would be reduced, and the facility said the family would not receive a bill. In Sussman's case, the insurer paid it all, but those dollars came from people who pay insurance premiums. And health experts say high prices are a major reason why Americans pay so much for health care. So, the story goes on. It talks about how Medicare will reimburse. How much money do you think Medicare will charge for COVID-19 tests? Keep in mind, it's $10,000 for this guy.
Hopefully it's somewhere like around $100.
It's not even that. It's $42.13.
Beautiful.
So there you go. So if you get a Medicare COVID test, they'll pay $42. But if you have a private insurance, it's $10,000. $10,000. And this is a doctor that worked for and at the clinic. What does that tell you?
We definitely need a reform regarding our whole medical insurance business.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. And he had Golden Rule Insurance was his insurance provider, and now they're investigating to see why this had happened and how many other overpayments have been made. But this gentleman was actually a medical doctor. This was his firm, and he is just astonished by how, as he put it, and I'm quoting, Golden Rule hadn't fought for a better deal and had paid more than $2,000 for a quick walk-in visit for a test. He was happy not to get hit with the bill, but he still didn't feel right.
Because it's not right.
It isn't right. And look, so right now, CDC says you don't really need to get a COVID test unless you're in close contact with someone known to have coronavirus. And close contact means within 6 feet for 15 minutes. Did you notice that?
Yes.
You can't just brush by somebody like at a grocery store.
Right.
You got to be in close contact for 15 minutes, kind of like when you're on the plane.
Yeah.
So, but that's where we are. That's where we are in the world of coronavirus. And, I don't know. We're going to see when this all plays out exactly where in the dickens we are in terms of a lot of the fraud. But when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about coronavirus, and the CDC has some new information, as well as the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
I like that.
Yeah, so we're going to
look at any more recalls.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some recalls. So when Safety Matters returns,
we'll be right back.
to Safety Matters. This is Russ Kensior.
And this is Tony B.
As I mentioned in the previous segment, which we were talking about CDC, there's a little spin-off story that came from Legal Templates. It's an online legal organization, company.
And what do they have to say?
U.S. divorce rates skyrocket amid COVID-19.
Because they were in the same room together.
Divorce rates have spiked in the U.S. during the coronavirus pandemic as couples have been stuck at home for months, says Legal Templates. The number of people looking for divorces was 34% higher from March through June compared to 2019.
They probably, because, most men said, hey, the women would go, why are you on that couch all this time?
Yeah.
He's like, hey, man, what else am I going to do? I want you to...
Yeah, it does. It says the combination of stress, unemployment, financial strain, death of loved ones, illness, homeschooling, there is enough to really...
Oh, man, knock you out of the park.
Mental illness and more has put a significant strain on relationships. The data showed that 31% of the couples admitted the lockdown has caused irreparable damage to their relationship. So that tells you that you can only be with the one you love for so long.
I see.
Interest in separation during quarantine peaked on April the 13th. just about 15 to 20 days into when the vast majority of states began lockdown. So things really have upticked. Interestingly, newlyweds took the hardest hit. In fact, 20% of couples who sought divorce were married within the past 5 months or less, compared to just 11% in 2019.
That's sad.
This is interesting. The states along the Bible Belt recorded the highest number of divorce rates during COVID-19 pandemic, including Arkansas and Alabama. And the number of life insurance policies and payouts required in divorce settlements soared as well.
I see.
So there's one of the unintended consequences of the lockdown.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about consumer product safety companies.
Yes, that's what we talked about.
This is interesting. The Boy Scouts of America. You know the little badges that they get, the little pins? Well, the Boy Scouts of America recalls Cub Scout activity pins due to violation of the federal lead content ban. Now, these are the little metal pins that the little Cub Scouts put on their uniforms. Well, can't have that. According to this, it says the pin's face and shaft contain levels of lead that exceeded federal lead content ban. Lead, of course, is a toxic material. If ingested by young children, can cause adverse health issues. Which is interesting because we're going to have a episode coming up here talking about water, and most of the water pipes in our country were made of lead.
In the old days, yes.
Yeah, so now you can't have a little pin that might have lead in it if a child, again, was to ingest it. I mean, I guess kids eat these pins. 78,000 of those pins are being recalled, and they were distributed exclusively by the Boy Scouts of America.
Very interesting.
Children's sleepwear have been recalled, and this seems to be endless, due to failure to meet flammability standards, burn hazards. Yes. Children's sleepwear by the brand of Buns Kids, Bunz Kidz, children's sleepwear, set to be recalled due to flammability risk and injury to children. There's about 6,000 pajamas, basically, that are being recalled. And they were sold at JCPenney's, Marshall's, TJ Maxx, nationwide. And they're going to be recalled because of flammability issues. And guess what country they're made in?
China.
Correct.
That's why you're listening to...
Haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, there we go. Safety matters. That's why you listen to this show. We bring you the latest information.
In unsafe products.
Amen.
And again, how would anybody know this? I mean, who goes to the Consumer Product Safety Commission website to find product recalls? How would you ever know?
And you hardly hear it on the news.
Right. So we do have a link on our Facebook page and our website to the CPSC guide position on the website where they discuss and publish all the recalls. So you can find them by just going to our website. As far as little children goes, there's another recall. This is by the Bonsu company. It's a Bonsu recalls Miniware. These are teething spoons due to a choking hazard. So little children that are teething have this teething spoon, and it can break off in the child's mouth when used as a teether, posing a choking hazard.
Oh, boy.
Nothing like feeding your child with a spoon and it chokes them. But it says Bonsu has received one report of an infant who bit through the silicone teething spoon, resulting in a piece separating inside the infant's mouth. These are, they have been sold on Amazon.com, Dillard's, etc., and manufactured in Taiwan. So the folks in Taiwan have a recall. The last recall is Dick's Sporting Goods. This one's quite fascinating. Dick's Sporting Goods recalls safety ropes due to fall and injury hazards. It says the ropes can fail when used in freezing conditions, posing fall and injury hazards. These are the kind of ropes that people use for climbing.
Oh, my goodness.
So 63,000 of them are being recalled. They were manufactured under the Field and Stream Lifeline, and they're called the linesman and safety ropes, and they're used to reduce the risk of a fall when climbing. So they are being recalled. Imagine that failing. The safety rope failed. So the firm received one report of the rope failing during freezing weather, and these, of course, are manufactured in China.
And what's the name of that company again?
Well, it's Field and Stream is the brand, and it's sold through Dick's Sporting Goods.
Gotcha.
So if you have a rope, you may want to bring it back. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about water quality. You drink tap water, bottled water?
I drink tap water.
You do? You don't drink bottled water?
I filter it through the refrigerator.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like a good idea. I actually do the same thing. You ever notice this time of the year, the water
A little stinky.
Yeah, it tastes like pond water. Did you ever notice that? I mean, it has an odor to it. So when we return, we will be speaking with Seth Siegel, who is a New York Times best-selling author. In fact, he wrote the book called Troubled Water. And it's all about the quality of water that we drink. And it's really a fascinating discussion coming up when Safety Matters returns.
This is Russ Kenzior, and welcome to Safety Matters. One of the things that we often take for granted is the quality of the drinking water and the water that we consume, the water we bathe in, the water we use. Most people assume that when you go to the faucet in your home and you fill a glass of water, or you make coffee or tea, that the water you're using is safe, that the water you're consuming is safe. That may not always be what you think. Joining me today is New York Times bestselling author Seth Siegel, who wrote the book Troubled Water, What's Wrong with What We Drink. And when I read this book, Seth, it took me back to the 1960s for some reason, where it reminded me of Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, where she talked about chemical use, pesticides, DDT, all the after effects of what was assumed to be safe. And when reading your book about drinking water, not only was it troubling, great title, but it really exposed a lot of kind of scary information. And if you wouldn't mind, Seth, kind of a little background on yourself, tell the audience who you are and why did you write this book?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Russ, for having me on your show. I'm really honored to be part of you and talk to your audience. And your reference to Rachel Carson is... I would be grandiose and lacking in all humility to think that I'm the equal in any way of Rachel Carson, who set off the entire environmental movement. But I am flattered to say that one U.S. senator, after reading my book, contacted me and wrote that as Rachel Carson's book changed the way we think about agriculture, that almost unquestionably that if this book gets traction and people get a chance to read it and hear about it, which is all the reason why he said people would not want to be able to see it, that we might have the same type of revolution about drinking water. And the reason for that is that people are properly worried about their own interests, their own health, the health of their children. And when people understand just how dangerous their drinking water is potentially, and even alternatives like bottled water may be dangerous for them, that they're going to demand a solution. And the good news is that solution is at hand. This is not a hard to fix. There is technology that already exists that doesn't have to be invented, that's not terribly expensive, that we can have. And I talk about this in my book, how we could transform our drinking water in America and significantly improve the public health of the country. For me, myself, I'm sort of a classic do-gooder. I'm not an anti-business guy. I'm not politically strongly leaning one way or the other. I'm a classic centrist, and to some degree, the fact that I was so swayed by this point is more compelling. If I was somebody who was already radicalized, you would think that, of course, I'd be in a rage. But I'm just a guy. I'm a business guy. I'm a centrist. I'm a do-gooder. I write books. I read books. I give speeches. And when I learned about the scope of the problem and how widespread it is that there are contaminants in our drinking water, and how completely asleep at the switch the EPA has been, not just in one administration, not just with one political party, but whoever is in the White House, whoever controls Congress, nothing ever changes in terms of getting us healthier, safer drinking water. And so I said, I'm a concerned citizen. I just want to tell the story and see what we can do to get more people like you, Russ, engaged and to tell the story and to amplify the story. And if enough people call out for this, I guarantee you the political figures who make the choices for us will decide to spend the not very large amount of money we need to spend to get healthy drinking water.
You know, it seems like we just go from one crisis to the next. And unfortunately, your book, your subject hasn't become a crisis. And that's what it oftentimes takes. Now, we've seen what happened in Flint, Michigan, apparently what's taking place in Chicago with their water system. Your book is broken down into three areas. You have the first section is called Part 1, the broken system. And I think that really says it all. The system is broken. The second section talks about the challenge. And then thirdly, you talk about solutions. What I found so compelling in part 2, it's actually chapter 4, it's pills in the water. And you opened my eyes to something that I think most people really don't even consider. And I'll read a section. It says, and among most significant contributors to contaminants getting into the ecosystem are the more than 14,000 wastewater treatment plants around the United States. Unless connected to a septic system, what goes down the sink, shower, bath, dishwasher, washing machine, and toilet is transferred to one of these facilities. You go on to talk about a March 2008 study that checked the drinking water of 28 major metropolitan U.S. regions and found pharmaceutical products in the drinking water of 24 of them, putting 41 million people at risk. This I think, is such a compelling point as to the unintended consequences of the consumption, the mass consumption of medications that ultimately pass through the human body. As you noted in your book, most of the pharmaceuticals that are consumed are not that effective. What is it, 90% of it passes through through the urine and into the wastewater. Well, here in Texas, most of our water is drinking water, comes from lakes. And so we have runoff, we have discharge, and we have reservoirs. And this chapter particularly, Seth, jumped out at me and really scared the hell out of me, to be honest with you. Would you talk a little bit about what's going on with medications? Because when most people think about contamination in water, they're going back to industrial runoff, the things that well, as you mentioned, Rachel Carson pioneered back in the 1960s with the environmental movement. But today it's this kind of hidden or latent transparent contaminants that are coming by way of medications. And again, spend a minute just talking about that, Seth. That's really an important subject.
But I don't want your listeners to think that Rachel Carson solved the problem. We still have significant amounts of pesticides and herbicides and industrial chemicals that are getting into our drinking water, of course, in very minute quantities. But I'll talk about pharmaceuticals and why it's a problem. So about 60% of Americans take at least one pharmaceutical product every day. About 20% take 5 or more pharmaceutical prescription drugs every day. And multiply that by 330, 340 million Americans, and you are talking about a very large number of pills that are deposited into our showers, our toilets, and then get flushed down and they all get aggregated. And as I said in the book, unless it's a home septic system, in which case it gets into your waste, it gets to the groundwater, but otherwise it goes to a wastewater treatment facility. And here's the bad news, and here's the good news. The bad news is that we are still using technologies that were invented and started to be applied about 100 years ago, actually a little bit more.
Wow.
And what that technology was and is that what happened was people started aggregating the sewage because they found that by just dumping raw sewage, it was smelly and it destroyed property values. And the right idea for mayors was, hey, wait a second, instead of waterfronts being open sewers, we could turn waterfronts into valuated properties and charge more for taxes there. And so they began installing wastewater treatment facilities to get rid of the brown, smelly stuff. And the technology they use is basically one of 3 technologies, all of which was in place, as I say, by around the year 1920. Now, that's the bad news. The further bad news is that in the vast majority of America's 14,000 wastewater treatment plants, that's still the treatment that we are using. The good news is, as I said in my opening remarks, the technologies exist to purify that water and to clean it of wastewater. So why is this a problem? What happens is, under the Clean Water Act, federal act, which is looking out for us, every sewage facility has to purify the water to a certain level, and then it's authorized legally, breaking no law, to dump the rest of that water into a waterway, a river, a lake, a stream, and then it comes back at us as a cocktail. Now, because of the fact that the pharmaceutical products are designed to be durable, they are organic compounds, but they're durable organic compounds. They're made so that they don't perish like a peach in your refrigerator after a couple of days. And so pills can last a year, 2 years, and they're made to be durable. You take the pill, part of it hits with a problem, whatever it is, and the rest is excreted. Then it gets into our wastewater. Then the wastewater is treated. And then the wastewater is pushed out into the lake or the river. And then it comes back at us as a cocktail of a little bit of psychiatric medicine and a little bit of heart medicine and a little bit of birth control pill and a little bit of this and that. And there are over 50,000 pills that are approved by the FDA. And many of these medications are coming back at us because they don't get destroyed in the process. And then we are ingesting this. And what we do know is that if you are a pregnant woman, if you have a young child, if you are immunosuppressed, you've recently had COVID or you've recently had the flu, or if you are on chemotherapy, if you are any of these people and other categories as well, you are going to be highly susceptible to this cocktail of contaminants that are coming at you. Because what do we know about drugs? The FDA approves medications for a specific person, for a specific dosage, for a specific duration. And what's coming back at us is the wrong person, usually, in an unknown dosage for an unknown duration. And that's why we have to fix this problem. It's fixable. We have the technology to fix it. We're just choosing, because we want to be cheap, we're choosing not to fix it.
Well, you mentioned the cocktail. Another part of the cocktail you write about, which are microplastics, plastics that are actually in the water itself. In fact, I remember reading just recently that they actually detected microplastics on the poles, North Pole and the South Pole, that they're pretty much everywhere.
Everywhere, and in the intestines of fish all over the world. Oh, absolutely. Yes, the microplastics are extremely tiny pieces of plastic. You wouldn't, if you held it in your hand, you wouldn't notice that it's in your hand. It's very, very small. And the question about and so forth, it's not a health hazard, it's an aesthetic issue. But the question is whether or not bacteria and viruses can survive on the surface. Bacteria and viruses are extremely very tiny in size and volume. And the question that scientists have not grappled with, are grappling with and trying to understand, is to the extent to which viruses in particular can survive on the edges and the surface of these tiny pieces of plastic. And then when we drink it and ingest it, it starts to affect our bodies. Now, just so you should understand the context of this, the academic studies, the scientific studies that I report on in the book, there is hardly an instance of someone who checked for these microplastics in the production of food or beverage that didn't find them. So that in all 5 Great Lakes, vast bodies of water, beer that was made, commercial beer that was brewed with water drawn from the 5 Great Lakes, in all cases, microplastics were found.
We're talking with Seth Siegel, author of Troubled Waters. When we come back, we're going to pick up the conversation, and I got a story of my own. So when we return with Safety Matters. Welcome back to Safety Matters. This is Russ Kenzier, and I'm speaking with author Seth Siegel about his book, Troubled Water. I keep saying Troubled Waters. It's Troubled Water. I actually have an interesting story of my own. Back in the 1990s, I served on a small town's environmental board, and we reported directly to the city council And one of the things we were charged with overseeing was the water quality. And surprisingly, the city really never had published any water quality tests. And this goes back 25 years. So the Environmental Board asked for permission to go ahead and have the water tested. The city allowed it. And when the results came back, Seth, we had a more than threefold level of what's called a trihalomethane. And you talk about this in your book, which is formed when chlorine comes in contact with organic material, and it creates this trihalomethane, which is known to be a cancer-causing element. So when the city council was alerted to that, surprisingly, they didn't want to do anything about it. So members of the Environmental Board, including myself, and by the way, Seth, I am also, like you, a do-gooder, really felt it was important that the community know that this was taking place. They also said it had something to do with turbidity when they mix different types of water from different sources, which the city was doing at the time. Long story short, we put out a newsletter to the city just cautioning them that the water has in fact been tested and has this very highly elevated level of a known carcinogen, and the city decided to terminate me. I was fired from the Environmental Board for being, I guess, a do-gooder. And it's an interesting story because apparently there's a lot of different things that can be tested for that come up in drinking water, from industrial chemicals to pills to microplastics, and we can go on and on. But where are we today, Seth? Are we any better off than we were 100 years ago? Have we made any improvements? I know we have chlorine in the water, and a lot of people think that's a safety element, and obviously it is, but we also have fluoride in the water. And what effects do those two chemicals have as far as safety?
Well, by the way, your story is a sad one. It's a funny one. It's sort of like when to scream to the skies and say, "What are you talking about? You're Paul Revere. You told them the problem is here. The problem is here." And instead of saying thank you and giving you, making you the man of the year, they fired you. I mean, it's, the unfortunate part of the story with that, Russ, is, and I'll get to your other question in a second. But the problem is that, as I report in my book, that is so common. There is so many times of situations where because the fact that the interests out there are that we should not be aware of what's going on, and the EPA prefers to not just the Trump EPA, but any EPA, it prefers to us not to be aware of what's going on, that the modus operandi for the water industry is the less people know, the better. So that, for example, every year the federal law requires that everybody gets, it's called a consumer confidence report. It could be written in some foreign language or some Martian language. It's almost unreadable. I'm a water professional. I get mine every year, and I look at it and I say, what am I reading? I don't even know what I'm reading. So they do it in such a way that nobody should understand really what's going on with their water situation. So they thank you to you for raising the alarm, but your being fired is unfortunately common. And what we need to do is need to have more people like you saying, I'm not taking that anymore. Now, in terms of chlorine is essential. And that was an invention of, I talk about the history of that in my book. That was a story similar to the rest of what we're talking about. A doctor who came up with this idea of adding a little microscopic amount of chlorine in your water to kill off all these pathogens in your water. In a matter of less than 5 years after he adopted this technology, and he was brought up on charges, he had 2 trials. But finally it was revealed that this is the right way to go. Within 5 to 10 years of him making this the new standard, deaths from cholera in the United States dropped from a significant cause of public health to 0. Wow. So that he completely transformed our health profile. The fact that he's unknown to American history, his name is John Rose Leal, but the fact that he's unknown to American history is a tragedy because he is one of the greatest heroes. He saved the lives of unquestionably millions of Americans and around the world, billions of people since the 100 years since he's lived. There's no question of that. So chlorine is essential. And if it's not chlorine, it has to be something else. It doesn't have to be chlorine. It could be ultraviolet. It could be some other cleaning agent. But without cleansing the water of pathogens, we are all at severe risk of not having these carcinogens like THMs, trihalomethanes, getting into our system. but we're at risk of getting sick and dying within a matter of 24 to 48 hours. So dying quickly is what he kept us from doing. Dying slowly, unfortunately, we need a new John Rose Leal, and I think maybe I've tried to be that, but so far it hasn't worked so well. In terms of fluorinated water, we know that has significantly improved healthcare vis-a-vis cavities. When I was a kid, when you were a kid, probably we dreaded going to the dentist because we knew we were going to be getting drilled for cavities. That's really a thing of the past. I have 3 kids, and not one of them has ever had a cavity now, and that's largely not thanks to me banning their diet, but parts of their diet, but thanks to fluoride in the water. The problem is, and this is something where lots of people are accused of being nuts or conspiracists. The problem is that it turns out that a recent important scientific study out of Canada has revealed that fluoride in drinking fluoridated water reduces your IQ. Now, it doesn't reduce it so much that you become a slobbering idiot, but the question is the trade-off. And I think that we were not adequately educated by our public officials, our media, our academics out there as to what the risks were. And I think that that's a metaphor, if I may, for the larger story. I think that Americans are entitled to ask the question of what's the trade-offs. If for an extra $1 a month, for an extra $2 a month on my water bill, am I prepared to see a better health future? Or do I prefer to have it where my son or child might end up having cancer, or my wife may end up having a miscarriage when she gets pregnant? I mean, and if so, if people are prepared to make those choices, then fine, we should do it in an informed way. But we should stop deceiving the public about the fact that everything is just perfectly fine and the water is pure and the water is great, when it just isn't. And we should tell the truth about it and let people decide. And once they understand the risks they're putting themselves at, they'll decide. And I think people, by the way, have already started to decide. Bottled water in America, which has created a huge solid waste problem. Bottled water in America has become a default drinking water system for millions and millions of Americans. Last year, 70 billion separate water containers were sold in the United States. For a third of all Americans who never drink tap water, that has become their exclusive way of drinking. And for another third, they report that half or more than half of the time they only drink bottled water. So that's why you have such a vast amount of consumption of this. And it's not people who are out in picnics. It's people who are sitting in their kitchens. 60% of all bottled water is consumed in people's kitchens. So this is an indictment of people's drinking water systems, tap water systems, and it's also a statement that the public, rich and poor, are prepared to spend their money on bottled water rather than otherwise. And so this is a message to politicians that for a very little bit of extra money, we can fix our drinking water systems and have a happy water future.
You bring up another excellent point, bottled water. People believe that bottled water is safer than tap water. And I'm not certain if that's really the case. In fact, probably within 5 miles of my home is a bottled water facility, and they use, in essence, tap water, and they just run it through additional levels of filtration. They're not getting those microplastics. I don't believe they are. They're putting in plastic containers. But Seth, is bottled water safer than tap water?
Well, the bottled water industry, which is the fastest growing consumer product in the United States for more than 20 years, the bottled water industry wants you to think that it is, and the answer is in many cases it is. So for certain specific brands, I'm not here to endorse any brand, but for certain specific brands, they have a very, very good track record of healthy, safe water in their bottles. However, if the bottles are stored in a heated facility, or it doesn't have to be heated, but in a facility where it's hot, let's say, you've perhaps driven up and you're a gas station. I've seen it in my gas station. You pull up, it's a hot summer day. There's a big pallet of cases of bottled water. Or you leave a bottle of water in your car, you go to the beach, you come back, you sip it, it's warm. That water almost certainly is not safe to drink because the plastic gets heated and chemicals in the plastic then migrate from the plastic into the drinking water. And then and I don't care how pure it is, unless it's a glass bottle. I don't care how pure the source water is. If it's in a plastic bottle that's gotten hot, it's not that safe anymore.
Well, we're here in Texas. It's hot all the time, and they sell bottled water that's always stored, or much of the time stored in hot areas. Do water filter systems? I mean, they advertise a lot of the 4 or 5 level layer water filters, that go on the sink or in the home. They have reverse osmosis systems. Are any of those, a good alternative to bottled water if you just want to drink tap water and just filter it at the point of use?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I have a chapter of that in the book Troubled Water, my book. And I talk about that because what I say is that this really should be a societal issue, and we should ask our elected officials to fix this problem for us, because they can, but that we can't also sit around waiting for them to wake up. And in the meantime, we need to protect our family's health and so forth. And so, yes, if you are affluent and you have $4,000 to spend, you should get a reverse osmosis system. But understand that every 6 months you have to have a professional come in and change your filter. You can't do it yourself. And if you don't have that kind of money, and not everybody does, then there's different levels of protection you can give yourself. Again, I identify all that stuff down to just a few dollars for certain kinds of pitchers. But those are sort of stopgap type attempts to fix you, because it fixes your specific water, but it doesn't necessarily fix the water of your next door neighbor and their kid. And one of the things that we know is that if you're drinking leaded water, for example, you are significantly higher at risk for dropping out of high school, for having a lower IQ, for having attention deficit disorder, for being arrested at least once before your 16th birthday. And so we condemn people across this country. There were about 10.5 million lead service lines to people's homes in America. We condemn people to bad futures, bad outcomes, because we refuse to take the simple and obvious steps we need to replace all the lead service lines that are in the United States.
Well, I say it a lot, Seth, and you said the same thing. If you're waiting for government to look out for your safety, to make everything just right, well, you're going to have a long wait. And people do have to get involved. They have to understand what risk is. And that's part of my profession as a safety professional, is everything has a trade-off. There's risk in everything we do, and you understand and you weigh the risk, and don't assume. Don't assume just because it's coming out of a faucet that it's safe. In my area, floor safety, don't assume when you go to a flooring store and you want to buy a new flooring material that it's safe, because most manufacturers of flooring don't even test their products or rate them. And sadly, you find out, especially if you're an elderly person, you find out that it was unsafe when you fall. And the same thing is true of water quality. It's a hidden, kind of a latent, you can't taste these elements. Most people here in Texas will complain about this time of the year that the water tastes like organic material. It tastes like a pond. So when you go to the sink, the water has an off taste. And of course, they always complain to the water center, the water facility in our county. It's Tarrant County, Texas, and our water comes from Lake Worth. And they'll complain, and they'll always say, "Oh no, it's just a taste issue. It's this time of the year when the organics are growing." But the really bad stuff, Seth, is undetectable by taste.
Yeah, not only is it undetectable, but what people think is a way to make their water pure is to boil it, actually can concentrate some of these contaminants and make it more compellingly difficult for you and your health. So when we think about how am I going to make my water safer? I'm going to boil it. If anyone's sitting at home saying, well, I don't need to buy any of these fancy, reverse osmosis systems, I'm just going to boil my water, I really want to alert them to the fact that, Russ, look, I think we're on the same page in that while my goal was to simply get better drinking water, my larger intent was to arouse a slumbering citizenry. That really is my larger intent. We take for granted all kinds of things in our daily life, and we assume that sort of like our mommy or our daddy looking after us, that our elected officials are going to look after us. And I don't want to be cynical. And again, as I said earlier, I'm a centrist. I'm not a radical in any way. But my work in the world of water for a number of years now has made me clear that elected officials will only address a situation when there's a crisis and they have no choice. I spoke to a U.S. Senator about water issues, and not the same one who kindly made the comparison to Rachel Carson. But I spoke to a U.S. Senator, and I said to him, why aren't you guys jumping on top of this? Why aren't you doing something? And he said, let me tell you the secret. about Washington, D.C. And let me tell you the secret about every government in this country. We would prefer to spend 10 times more when it's a crisis than to be ahead of the curve and looking over the horizon and fixing it now. He says, because there's no mandate to fix it now. He said, when it's a crisis, then there's a mandate and then we'll fix it. So I would argue that let's be mature about this. Let's be sophisticated about this. Let's understand that there's nobody who isn't drinking our water. There's nobody who's not affected by this. And let's get the water we can and the future and the healthier future that we can get.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Seth. Appreciate all your insight.
A pleasure. Thank you, Russ.